like to introduce Microsoft to you. As you know, Microsoft has a number of campuses, and if Yoram Yaacovi will kindly join me here on the podium. Many of the things that happen in your computer come out of Microsoft, and as you know, and you're about to find out, many of those Microsoft applications are built by the geniuses at the Microsoft campuses, and Yoram Yaacovi is the head of the pack. And I'd like to introduce you to him as he tells us all about the innovation that takes place and how this is more than a startup. This is the real deal.
All right. Thank you, Sharona. Thanks for having me here. I usually travel to Seattle, so the weather here is friendlier for an Israeli, I have to tell you that. They put me between the drinking panel and lunch. So I reckon you're not going to ask me any question because of lunch. And even if you do, we'll be asking them under the influence because of the drinking panel. So I have about 15 minutes, even less, to tell you about Microsoft in Israel and what's unique for Microsoft in Israel, or why is Microsoft investing in this small country in the Mediterranean. And you cannot do that without talking about some history. Microsoft actually opened an R&D center in Israel in 1991, 21 years ago. This was then the first Microsoft R&D center outside of Redmond. There was not even another R&D center in the US. Any idea why did Microsoft open an R&D center in Israel 21 years ago and not anywhere else? No. No. So I have to disappoint you. It was not because of strategic thinking. It was not because of Israel as a great high-tech nation, because it wasn't the case then. We only had Intel back then and a few other companies. It was really because two Israelis decided to go back from Redmond to Israel. Company didn't want to lose them. They said, okay, just keep on doing what you've been doing so great in Redmond, do it in Israel. And they built a team, and suddenly there were 100 engineers working for Microsoft in Israel. And this went like this for about 15 years, till 2006. And in 2006, the company actually made a significant decision. The company actually decided that 3 R&D centers are going to be strategic R&D centers for Microsoft. The one in India, the one in China, and the one in Israel. And why Israel compared to India and China, I'll talk about this in a second. Today, we are about 550 engineers in the Israel R&D Center. We have 2 specific domains. We have 6 technology areas. We did 7 acquisitions in Israel in the last 5 years. 4 strategic agreements and investments in Israel. So a lot of activity in the last few years in Israel. The site grew significantly, all because 5 years ago, the company decided that Israel is going to be a strategic R&D center. And I think most of what I'm going to talk about today is why. Why did Microsoft made that decision? After all, I think everyone in the room understands why Microsoft invests in India and China. Why is India an R&D center, a strategic R&D center? Why China one? China and India are both low-cost labor for Microsoft, but more important, they're huge markets. The labor in Israel is not cheap. We are about the same cost as the US, maybe slightly lower. The market in Israel is really small. I mean, the size of New Jersey. There are actually 32 Chinese cities which are bigger than Israel in population. So why Israel? And it all goes to 2 words on the left side where our vision is, the vision of the center. If you look at the vision of the center, it's talking about leveraging the strengths of Israel to create value for Microsoft and our customers by using Israel technological and entrepreneurial assets. And this is the main thing, these 2 words, technology and entrepreneurs. If you ask Steve Ballmer why he invests in Israel, our CEO, this is why. Israel has a very strong technology basis. I don't know how many of you know, but there is a ranking of the first 25 computer science departments in the world. And after all, Microsoft software company, computer science. Out of the first 25, there are 4 Israeli universities in the first 25. There isn't a single country other than the US which has 10 in the first 25. There is a single country with more than 1 computer science department in the first 25. Israel has 4. This is the reason. It's talent. It means that there is technological talent in Israel. This is one of the main reasons Microsoft invests in Israel. The second one is the entrepreneurial part. Israelis by nature are entrepreneurs. There are a lot of theories why that happens. There's actually a book written about it, Startup Nation. I'm sure many people in the room read the book. But forget why. The bottom line is that as Israelis, we are not only innovators, we don't only have good ideas. I don't think we have a monopoly on good ideas. I think people in China and India and the US and anywhere else have good ideas. Somewhere in Israel, people have ideas, they take the ideas, they build them, and they know how to sell them. And all of these three parts are important. To have the idea, to be able to build it, and to be able to sell it. And that's what we do well in Israel. That's why we have more startups than any other country in the world other than the US, not per capita, in total numbers. Israel today has about 5,000 startups. This is more than any country in the world, again, other than the US. Israeli companies startups are being sold about 80 a year. Again, more than any other country other than the US, not per capita, in total, in absolute numbers. And this is one of the main reasons Microsoft invests in Israel, because of this entrepreneurial spirit in the country. So what I'm going to do next, I'm going to tell you how, in the R&D Center, how we leverage that for Microsoft and for our customers. The first thing we do is, even by the way we build the center, you would imagine that the center in Israel will involve lots of innovation and a lot of startup, which is correct. But first and foremost, we build significant assets for the company. So we don't only build startups, sell them. We also try to build significant teams, products, companies in Israel. So it's not only startups, but it's also significant assets. We call them product assets. Today in the Israel R&D Center, we have 2 product assets. Each of them is about 200 engineers working on them. One in business intelligence, and the second one is in what we call BYOD, which is bring your own device. Lots of people today bring their own devices to work. It's not only the PCs that you have at work. You bring your smartphone, you bring your iPad, and so on. How we support that. These 2 areas, you can look at them as 2 small 200 people companies in Israel. And these are our main product assets in the center right now. But then we understand that we are in the startup nation. And we are also building startups in the R&D Center. We call them future bets. There are several areas in which we have future bets. These are areas in which we believe will grow significantly in the future. One example is what we call NUI, Natural User Interfaces. This is the ability to operate your computer or your Xbox with your body, by speaking, by moving hands, and so on. This is an area which will grow significantly. We have a team investing in it. We expect it to grow. Think about it as a startup with a lot of potential to grow. Another one is advertising, display ads. The ability to show you the right advertisement for you, which will not show to someone else. Another area is entertainment intelligence. This is the ability to allow you or tell you which should be the next movie you will watch, which is the next game you should play. Recommend to you what to do next. And finally, what we call IPE, Information Platform Experiences, which is taking all the signals that you get into your phone and making some smarts out of them. One good example that I usually give in Israel, we have a service in Israel for parking we call Pango. When you park your car, you call a number on your cell phone, and you say where you parked. And when you finish, when you leave, you call that number and you stop the parking. That's how you pay for parking. Okay? Lots of people forget to call when they're done. And this is actually a great business model for that company, right? For Pango. One thing we do with analyzing mobile signals, we know that you stopped your car and you parked. We know that you left your car. We know that you called that number. We can tell you when the car starts moving again, call that number to cancel it. We can actually call it for you. These are the kind of smarts we do with signals on your phone, because we know a lot about you on your phone. It's all private, it's all on your phone, it doesn't go anywhere else. It's all happening on your phone. So these are some of the examples we do in Israel with these future bets. So it is the combination of the future bets and the significant assets we try to combine, which we do in Israel specifically, because of the unique characteristics of the country. Finally, we have some expert teams. I don't know if you know, but all of Microsoft software that has any face recognition in it is based on technology developed in Israel, in the R&D Center. Again, innovation of the R&D Center. And on the right side, you can see all the different areas in which we specialize in Israel and in the R&D Center. So I think the first thing we do in Israel for Microsoft is, again, the combination of startups and significant investments of larger teams, larger products. Moving along, we have in Israel a couple of research investments. One of them is we have what we call a Microsoft research team, which does academic research in Israel. Think about it as a faculty of computer science in a university. These are professors that write academic papers, go to conferences, win best paper awards. We have a small team in Israel that does that. The second one is what we call an innovation labs team, applied research. The best way to think about it is think about startups at Microsoft. At every given moment, there are about 5 or 6 small teams of 2, 3, 4 engineers that think about ideas, build them, and try to sell them, just like any startup that you know are doing, but they're doing it inside Microsoft. And this has been a very, very successful venture for us. And you can understand why, because it's in Israel, because that's one of the things we do best. Again, the innovation, build, sell. One of the biggest innovations we did in the innovation labs in this specific team is actually a process innovation. We introduced what we call an out-of-the-box week. And I'm going to show you about 1 minute, a little bit less, of a video clip, and I'll talk about it, explain what it is. So we introduced about 4 years ago a concept we called out-of-the-box week. For 1 week, people go and do whatever they want. They stop working on their real projects, and they go and do whatever they want. They can do it at home, at work, on the beach, wherever they want. We have no requirement whatsoever other than one. At the end of the week, you come out and show us what you did. You're not allowed to show presentations. You're not allowed to show documents. You have to show something working in hardware or software. It doesn't have to do with Microsoft Business. We don't care. We care about the innovation, the creativity. This has been a tremendous success for us. We started it initially with people in the R&D Center, but very soon people from the academia, students, came to be part of it. People from other companies came into this venture. And when we do, at the end of the week, in our auditorium, in the R&D Center, we do the presentation of the project. We have people from all over the country. Yossi Vardi always comes there. He'll talk tomorrow. And again, the idea is to create creativity and innovation. And this has been a great success for us. I think the biggest success is in the results. When I look at the successes of the R&D project, if I look at the successes of the innovation labs, or the projects that succeeded, that the projects that sold, that we exited with, they all came from this out-of-the-box week. They all came from ideas that people got 1 week to work on. They didn't come from my ideas or my boss's ideas. They came from the people that got 1 week to work on an idea. And this has been a great success for us. Another thing we did in Israel, we started about 3 years ago, is an event we call Think Next. Think Next is an event which is actually branded Think Next. It is a Microsoft event, but we are branding it Think Next because it's not only Microsoft. This is an event in which we call it Demo Fest. We bring demos from all over Israel, Microsoft demos as well, but also startups in Israel with the coolest demos that we can find. The only criteria to get in is that it has to be a cool demo. People have to see it and get really excited. We don't really care about the business model. We don't care about the future success. We care about how exciting it is, and if you are, as a consumer, you're going to go in and watch it, you're going to come out excited about the future of the world. We do it once a year. We started in 2009 in Israel, and we did our 4th event just a month ago in Israel. And the Think Next brand is now expanding. It's not only Israel. We've done such events in India and China and in the US. And it's expanding. We hope it will expand even more. The pavilion here is branded Think Next as well, showing some of the startups that we've shown in our Think Next event in April in Tel Aviv. And again, this is again one of the innovations coming out of the Israel R&D Center, simply recognizing that we are in Israel. We are not in India or China, we are in Israel, and this is why we want to be, to leverage the uniqueness of Israel. One more example on the same lines. Just a month ago, we announced and started the first ever Microsoft Accelerator Incubator in Israel. Microsoft doesn't have accelerators that are Microsoft branded anywhere else in the world but in Israel. We just started it a month ago. The accelerator is very simple. We bring companies, we have 10 companies in the accelerator. They work in our buildings. They have one floor just for them. We give them the floor, we give them the utilities, everything around it. Have to press that? No. I'm almost done. And we give them 4 months to work. They get all the Microsoft software and cloud time, Azure, our cloud operating system, for free. They get legal advice and financial advice from our partners for free. They get technical advice from us, from Microsoft, from our engineers for free. And for 4 months, they work there. And the number one KPI success for this program is that within 1 year, these startups are being funded. And hopefully later they will succeed. This is again coming out, the first accelerator in the Israel R&D Center, and now Microsoft is starting accelerator in other places as well. But it all started in the Israel R&D Center. And the last example is academia. As part of our R&D Center work, we invest in the academia. I told you earlier about the importance of academia, the technological advantage of the computer science departments. Here is an example. We invested as a company in the Technion. We built an e-commerce center in the Technion, in which professors from the Technion and our engineers are working together to create academic breakthrough in e-commerce. Again, this is one of the things we do in Israel specifically because of the strength of the academia in Israel. And we just actually yesterday had a commerce day to which people from all over the world came to talk about commerce in Israel. So this gives you on a very short time some examples of what we do in Israel, which is specific to Israel and to Microsoft. Again, thanks for having me. And if you are using Microsoft product, if you ever use business intelligence, use Xbox, you put advertisement on our websites, you should know these are products coming from Israel, made in Israel. Thank you.
Yoram, I want to thank you very much.
Thanks.
I have a question for you. You kindly brought over 5 or 6 of the Think Next success stories, and they're here in our pavilion of companies, and I hope you all will check them out because they are young, exciting, and really happening. But Microsoft is investing in these companies, or investing in their dreams and their aspirations. Why is Microsoft doing this? Since these companies are not really directly Microsoft, they're just enthusiastic entrepreneurs.
Yeah. So first, just to make sure, we are not investing money in these companies. We specifically don't want to take any stake or any capital in these companies. We're investing in giving them a place to work. And there are actually two main reasons for that as a company. Of course, we want to help the community in Israel. We want to help the ecosystem in Israel. This is one of the ways we are measured on. We also want them to eventually, if they succeed, use our operating system for the cloud, Azure, which is obvious for Microsoft. But maybe more important is we want them to work together with our engineers so that our engineers will learn how our startups are using our products. This is extremely important for us to understand that.
And as you're expanding the Think Next program, you're going to Think Next is uniquely an Israeli program. So although you'll demo around the world in China, India, the United States, and Israel, they will always be Israeli companies sponsored through Microsoft's Israel R&D Center?
Not exactly. Think Next is a brand that indeed was created in Israel by the Israel R&D Center. But when it happens in China and India, I expect these folks to actually show Chinese and Indian startups.
Okay, so should we be planning then to, out of the Israel conference, to recruit some startups that you can look at next year, and we can add them to your Think Next program?
Absolutely.
All right, you've got a program that just started here. That's a partnership.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you, Yoram.
Thank you.
A pleasure. And
All right.
please enjoy a little bit of our thinking outside the
All right.
windows as well.
Thank you very much.
Okay. But we want to all stay with windows, of course. Thank you very much.